Hello everyone and welcome to the final chapter in the architecture tutorial series on Blender Guru. I am your host, Andrew Price, and in this tutorial what we're going to be doing is taking the kitchen model that we created last week and exporting it using an external renderer called LuxRender. Now, I know that external renderers might be a little bit new to some of you, which is why I've created a complete introduction to external renders. So this is just a brief slideshow just to go over just the concept of external renderers, just to help people that have never experienced it or know what it is, just to have a deeper understanding of it. Okay, now the concept of it is fairly simple. So currently, when you render things with Blender, you're actually using what's called internal rendering. Okay, so you're modeling something in Blender, you're applying materials, lighting, and things like that. Then when you hit F12 and you go to render it, it calculates an algorithm and gets the right lighting and settings and things like that. And then it uses the internal Blender rendering system. So it's specific lighting instructions and things like that that are specific to Blender. Now, external rendering is very, very similar, except you're modeling as you would normally in Blender, so you're applying materials, lighting, and things like that. However, you don't hit F12. You use what's called an exporter. So that's a script which basically fires off that scene and the instructions and things like that to a separate rendering program which uses its own algorithm for calculating light and materials and things like that to give a different result. So that's what we're going to be doing in this tutorial. Now, what is the point of using external renderers? Okay, let's have a look. So there are a few advantages to using external renderers, the big one being more realistic results. Because currently, Blender does not have global illumination. If you hang around on 3D forums and things like that, you've probably heard people mention it a few times. Global illumination basically applies to when, say for example, light hits a wall, like a colored wall, that color will then bleed out onto other objects. So it's basically light reflecting off other things. So it's indirect lighting. Now, Blender 2.5 has developed that. Currently at the time of this tutorial, that doesn't work properly the way it should, which is why I've done this LuxRender tutorial instead. But yeah, global illumination is the big thing that a lot of external renderers have, so you do get a lot more realistic looking results. The other advantage is you get physically accurate renders. See, now normally in Blender you would say apply a color of a light, for example, like a lamp, and you can make it red or you can make it blue, things like that. With physically accurate rendering systems such as LuxRender, you don't apply energy values and things like that. You apply the wattage amount of a light. So you choose 40 watts for a fluorescent light. And you can also apply the black body temperature of the light. Okay, we'll get more on that later. And basically what that'll give you is an accurate render, an accurate representation of a real world light. So it's a completely different way of looking at things. It's not based on colors or basically faking things. It's using a physically accurate render system. The other thing is you can actually change the lighting whilst it's rendering, which might sound pretty confusing at first if you're used to the normal Blender way of rendering things, but you can actually change lighting, like the colors, how powerful the light is and things like that, whilst it's rendering in front of you. It's actually really cool to see it for the first time, but I'll show you more of that in the tutorial. The other big thing is you can actually pause rendering. So that is a really, really handy thing. So if you're rendering something and you step away from the computer and maybe you want to come back and maybe do some video editing, if you're using Blender, you wouldn't be able to do that because as soon as you hit escape and you stop the rendering, if you were to start it up again, it would start it from scratch. Well, with a lot of external renderers, you can pause the renderer. So you pause the CPU time, then you can do other things, then you can just start it back up again where you left off. Very, very handy. Now, there is a big disadvantage. renders like a bitch. I don't know how else to put that. External renderers are specifically, ones with very realistic results, global illumination, things like that. They do take a very, very long time to render. And as such, they're not used very much for animations. So if you're doing an architectural fly-through, for example, unless you've got a very expensive render farm on hand, chances are you're not going to be able to do an animation fly-through. So it's usually used just for 3D stills. It's very, very good at that, just making a very good, photographic representation of a building or whatever the product may be. But for animations, generally not so good, and you're better off sticking with the Blender internal engine for that. But again, if it's just for one-off scene, definitely external renderers are the way to go. Now, believe it or not, you've actually got quite a few choices when it comes to external renderers, okay? Just to name a few: V-Ray, Maxwell, RenderMan, Indigo, Octane, FryRender, Mental Ray, Yafaray, Sunflow, Kirgithia, etc. So these are all external renderers that are all basically competing with each other, and they're all boasting new features, faster render times, different things like that, and they're all in a big competition to be the one and only best renderer that's used across the industry. And there's a good reason for the competition. There's a lot of money involved in external renderers. Now keep in mind, this is not a 3D program where you do modeling and things like that, like 3D Max. This is an extra program on top of that to handle just the rendering process. So it can be quite costly, especially if you have to use multiple computers, render farms, things like that. You have to pay for all different licenses and things like that. So yeah, it does get pretty costly. However, the good news is LuxRender is free, open source. So that's the one that I'm going to be teaching you how to use in this. So completely open source, just like Blender, and it does give very competitively realistic results to other renderers out there. Now, there's a problem though that I do have to let you know of. As of the time of this recording, the Blender 2.5 exporter is currently broken. I read somewhere that there was an API change very recently in the Blender code which prevented this new exporter, which is a script that you put into Blender to make it work with an external rendering thing, and it doesn't work with Blender 2.5. There's a solution. Blender 2.49. Now, believe me, I'm the last person that wants to have to create a tutorial using Blender 2.49. Especially seeing as it's going to be obsolete very soon. But unfortunately, that's just the nature of creating training material for a beta program, things like that. There are things that just will stop working. So unfortunately, for this tutorial, just for the exporting process, we're going to have to go into Blender 2.49 a little bit. However, if you're watching this at a later stage, maybe a month or two down the line, there will no doubt be an exporter working for Blender 2.5. So you might want to check it out on the forums and look for that. But specifically for this tutorial, we're going to use 2.49, but it should be applicable for 2.5 exporter when it comes out later. Okay. Alright, so now that we've discussed all the external rendering engines, let's get into installing LuxRender for the first time. So to install LuxRender for the first time, what you need to do is head over to luxrender.net. Okay, and it'll take you to a page that looks like this. Just a second, there we go. And you can see here on the home page, if you go down here to the news section, it says LuxRender 0.7 released, and it's got a link. So click the new stable version link, and it'll take you to this thread here. So this is the latest version of LuxRender, and you've got your different operating systems, Windows, Mac, or Linux. The only two you really need to worry about is the installer. So just select whichever version of Windows or whatever operating system you've got. In my case, I've got a 64-bit version of Windows. Now, I've already downloaded it, so I'm just going to select the download file now. And I'll just show you how to install it, because I know a lot of people do have problems installing external renderers. So just go through the this wizard here, And you can see here on this page here, it's got exporters, LuxBlend Exporter for Blender. Now that's very handy because it's actually included the exporter for Blender automatically in the installation process, which makes this very, very easy to install. So just hit next, and you can see here that it's located the Blender script folder for you, which means it's going to install it into Blender for you automatically. Very, very good. And then just next again. Now, if you get a little message that pops up telling you in red text that you don't have Python, you will need to install Python. So just do a Google search for Python. And I think I installed version 2.6, something like that. And yeah, that'll work for you. And then just a matter of installing it and waiting for it to end. And there you go. LuxRender is now installed. Now, if you open up Blender 2.49 to access LuxRender, what you need to do is split the view like this, load up the scripts window, go to scripts, render, and select LuxBlend 0.7 exporter. So click that, and there you go. You've got this confusing at first look at a bunch of buttons and things like that. So it does look a little bit daunting at first, all these different options and tabs and things like that. So before we get into the complex kitchen tutorial, I do recommend that you just experiment with these settings just to come to grips with how LuxRender works, because it is very different to Blender. So you do need to sort of have an understanding of that before you try and get into something complex. So I'll just give you a brief overview right now of how to render your first scene in LuxRender, okay? So what I'm going to do is just make a very basic scene here with a little monkey, of course, as everybody does. And let's see, make it smooth. And let's position the camera in nice and close, like this. Okay. Alright, now what you can do, alright, let's just talk about the materials first of all, okay? So basically, if you are to use, when you're using Blender, basically you set up the materials down here. So you add a new material and you change settings over here. Now, if you're just to change these settings right here and you were to hit render in LuxRender, it's not actually going to make any difference, any changes, because the material settings down here don't actually work in LuxRender. They don't actually reflect the changes in an external rendering engine. You need to change these settings up here. So these are the settings in LuxBlender, in the script. So these settings behave very differently to the way material settings in Blender works. So for example, for LuxRender, you have to actually select the material type, the one to start off with before you start changing something. So, so for example, for this one, I want to make this a glossy, this monkey, let's call it monkey, like this. Now, one thing to note is although you're changing these settings right here, it is very, very good at guessing the settings that you want in Blender, okay? So for example, let's say if I turn this specularity value down to 0, down here like this. Now, if you go up to here and with the material settings, with the selected material there, you can see you've got the drop list. If you click the C button there, you can see it says Convert Blender Material to LuxRender Material. So you click that, and it will automatically guess from the material settings you've got down here as to what settings to use for LuxRender. And it's actually very, very good at getting it right. So for example, I turn the specularity for 0, and it's automatically suggested that it is a matte object, meaning a dull, no reflection material. And that's exactly right. So I'm going to leave that as that. Now for this monkey, we actually want it to be highly reflective, like a mirror. Okay, so what I'm going to actually do is I'm just going to turn this exponent value up. Now exponent, that is a setting which a lot of external renderers use, where basically in the real world, almost every single object is reflective. If you look around your room right now, it's hard to find an object that isn't reflecting other things in the room. Even just very slightly, everything is reflecting something. There's really no specularity in the real world. Specularity is just a fake sort of computerized a workaround for faking reflections, but external renderers all use basically they use reflections. So exponent is telling you how much to reflect. If you set it to 1, that's basically almost nothing. you can see it goes all the way up to 1 million, okay? And that is completely mirrored, okay? Now, you can set the amount of which to show. So the exponent will tell you how sharp to make the reflection, how clear to make it. Specularity, that changes how much reflection to show, okay? So just for an example, if it's completely black, then you won't see any reflection. If it's completely white, then it will show up like a mirror, okay? So if we just to give you an example, if I show us this as gray, if you click the update preview there, by the way, that'll give you a preview of what the material will look like in LuxRender. So that's what that looks like there. Now if we set this to white and we hit update preview, the object now becomes completely mirrored, because it's now it's sort of a bit hard to understand because it's got this color chart here, but it's basically saying no reflection, completely reflection, 100% reflection. Okay, so just sort of go off that method there. Okay, so I've got the monkey now as a completely mirrored object. The floor is now matte. Now for lighting. Now you can set up a light as you normally would in Blender with a sun lamp, things like that. However, LuxRender uses different lighting setups. So you can have a no environment, so it'll just be just based on mesh lighting in the scene, or you can have infinite, so you can use an HDR lighting setup, or you can use a sun and sky, so it'll have like a blue sort of tint to everything, as well as it will use a sun lamp to make a sort of the look of an outdoor lighting scene. So use sun and sky for outdoor lighting. Now for this, I'm just going to show you briefly how to use an HDR image lighting setup, because that is something that is used a lot in 3D, and I know a lot of people wondering how you can do it in Blender. As far as I know, you can't very accurately anyway. You can fake it in various ways, but LuxRender does it beautifully. And I'm just going to make this slightly smaller so it renders faster. And now let's hit render here for the first time, and let's see what it looks like. So you can see there's a little moving bar there. It's exported it to LuxRender. It's just popped into view automatically. And now you'll see here the results. Let's see, any second now you can see something. Okay, there you go. Now you can see that it gives you the whole image to start with. Blender renders things in like sort of squares, and it just sort of progressively renders it. LuxRender gives you the entire image straight away, but it gives it to you very noisy. So it doesn't look very clear at the moment. There's all this sort of weird little dots everywhere. Basically, the longer you leave this, the clearer the render will get. And actually, you won't actually know when the render is finished. It will continue to render until you tell it to stop. So basically, it's up to you to have a look at the image and say, yep, that's clear enough, the render's now finished. Then you hit stop. And you can see just basically, I mean, we'll get into this a bit later, but you can change the sort of the lighting, darkness, brightness, things like that, gamma. But the big one here, you can also pause rendering, pressing that button there. And yeah, so that's it's probably getting a little bit too advanced. But yeah, that is how to set up your first scene, install LuxRender, set up your first scene, and get it working in LuxRender. So now let's get on to the tutorial. Alright, so this is where we left off the tutorial in part 1, where we've basically just got a finished kitchen model there. Everything's in place. We just haven't got any materials or lighting or anything like that set up. So we're now going to move into LuxRender. So as I said at the beginning, we will need to use Blender 2.49. So open that up. And what we're going to do is we're going to import that entire scene from 2.5 into 2.49. So to do that, let's delete everything currently in the default scene. And we're going to click File and then go to Append or Link. And what we're going to do is that's going to let us import that entire scene from 2.5 into 2.49. So locate the dot blend that you saved. And then from this list, select Object. And then press A. And that will select every single object in the scene, and then just click Load Library. And you'll see now you have exactly the way it was in 2.5, it's now in 2.49. The only thing you need to change is the dimensions of this camera view. We need to just set that as 1000 by 1200 as it was before. Okay, so it's as you can see, that's 2.5 and that's 2.49 there. So it's exactly the way it was. So what I'm going to do is just split this view here, and we're going to load up the Lux Blend script. Okay, so what I'm going to show you first of all is how to set up the materials that I used for my scene. So we're going to add a new material. First of all, we're going to do the ceramic material. So that's the plates and these little pots and dishes and things like that. So I'm just going to call this material ceramic. And okay, you see over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the diffuse of this ceramic material to just a sort of a light white, something like that. And I'm going to make the exponent amount, say 500, just make it a little bit more reflective, and make the amount of reflective something a sort of a bit of midway gray. And let's just have a look with the update preview, just to see how that looks. So that looks pretty much looking pretty ceramic-y, I would say, pretty close to how a plate would look. So what I'm going to do is leave the material settings now, and I'm just going to select every object that has that ceramic material, and then so that's just going around shift selecting all those objects, and then selecting the first material again, and then pressing Control L, and then select materials, and that will just give every single material that same material. I mean, every single object that same material. So that's a quick way of doing that. Next material I'm going to show you is the chrome material. So I've got a lot of things down here which are ultra shiny, like a mirror sort of. So what I'm going to do is add a new material, call it chrome. It's a good idea. And so what I'm going to do is set the specularity to something ridiculous. Now remember, 1 million, that's a maximum, like basically just like a mirror. We don't want to make it that sharp where it's just replicating the exact environment. I'm going to make it 900,000, okay? Now if we clicked update preview here, we can have a look at how that looks. So you can see there, it's pretty sharp reflection, but it's very dull. If we set this as white, then that will make the entire reflection, like it won't show any diffuse color, just completely the reflection. And we don't actually want that. We want a little bit of diffuse. I'm going to set the diffuse as black, and I'm going to make this specularity a 0.8. So what we're going to get is sort of a duller reflection than what we've got there. Let's just have a look. And there you go. So that's pretty accurate, I'd say, to how Chrome looks in the real world. So we're going to leave that now, and I'm just going to select every object that is sharing that material. So that's all these shiny looking toasters and pots and pans and things down here. Got these mixers over here. There's a lot of chrome in this scene actually. That's pretty good. Also the sink over there, which I might just click this. Materials, there we go. By the way, I did read the comments. People said that I actually modeled this spring a complex way. You can actually use the screw modifier. I tried it, and you're right. Yeah, there's a new feature in the beta version of Blender 2.5 that allows you to use a screw modifier to very quickly model that spring shape. So just a quick note there. I've also got these pots here as well. I'm just going to give that chrome treatment. These utensils over here, all this rack, that sort of thing, all of that, as well as this little spice racky thing here as well. Alright, so those are all the materials. I'm just going to click that one there, Control L, materials, there we go. So now all those materials are now sharing the correct chrome material. Next one I'm going to show you very quickly is the white cabinet. So looking at the reference image that we had last time, the cabinet's very shiny. One of those like modern kitchens. So it's a little bit, yeah, as I said, more shiny than what you'd normally find for a kitchen. So we just need to be mindful of that. I'm going to try 500 and just see how this looks as a cabinet material. So that's it's looking pretty good, I'd say. Maybe just up it slightly, just to give it a little bit more reflection. So that's, I'd say that's pretty close to how the cabinet looks from the photo. Now, I will note that in basically to create to get the most out of your renders and get the best looking result, it basically comes down to how much time you spend on things like materials and lighting and just tweaking and tuning things to get the right material. Now, I'm rushing through things here just for the sake of this tutorial, but you do need to spend a lot longer, if you're wanting to create something that you could, I suppose, put in your portfolio and get a nice looking result. Yeah, definitely spend a lot longer than what I am here. Okay, so those are all pretty in place now. So what I'll show you now is just something a little bit more complex. That's this bench top here. So this bench, I want it to have a wooden texture. So what I need to do is I'm going to basically just apply the texture as I would normally in Blender, and then we're going to see if this LuxBlend can basically guess and convert the material. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, UV unwrap this this object here. So I'm just going to very quickly just select these edges here, those ones there, mark seam. I'm going to split the view, select UV image editor. I'm going to unwrap it. Now the image I'm actually going to use is one off CG Textures. I'll provide a link to it if you like, but it's Woodfine 48. So if you want to use that, by all means you can. It's just one I found works quite well with the bench, so it gives it a, I don't know, like a rustic sort of look to it, which I thought looked kind of cool. Just going to move that across, scale that up. So that's just going to squish it in a little bit more, so it looks like there's more wooden planks, I suppose. That's pretty good. So yeah, as I said, I'm just going to set this up as a material as if I was going to be rendering it in Blender. So I'm going to add the image. Select, whoa, that's a piece of bread. Let's select Woodfine 48. Maybe not that one. That one, there we go. And select map UV input. There we go. It's all ready to go. Now, if we go over, let's set this as bench. I'm going to close that off now. And let's select this bench from there. Now, yeah, it's if we select convert material there, you can see that it's now automatically set up this texture. And basically taken those material settings from down there into the texture settings up here. And if we click update preview, let's just have a look at how this looks. You can see that it's pretty much predicted it exactly the way the material should look. So I think we can leave that as is. We've got these other two objects here which are sort of the inside of it. I actually cheated a little bit. I've already UV unwrapped them, so I can just go ahead and select that as the UV material. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now I'll just quickly do the floor as well. That's got a different material to it, a different texture. So I'm just going to split the view again, UV image editor, project from view, and this is a different image texture. This one is called Woodfine 38. So this is just one that I found worked quite well for floors. So it's got that sort of like wooden plank feel, which looks quite good, I thought. And I'm going to call this material floor, and again add the texture as you would normally in Blender, like so. UV. There we go. So that's pretty good. And let's just click update preview. That's alright. What I might do is just set this exponent to say 200, and this will just make the floor just a little bit more shiny, so it doesn't look quite as rubbery as it is. So that's pretty good. It's the way it should be. Alright, so pretty much we've got most of the materials done. I'll just quickly do this stove fan. Let's say 500, something like this. Just to quickly sort of break up the scene a little bit more. Just applying a few more different materials. That's a little bit darker there. What was the other one? The pots. Yeah, give this one a pot handle. And this will just make a little render that we're going to do for the tutorial look just a little bit better. Let's have a look. Set that as a little bit black. Okay, so that's pretty good. So what we want to do now is we're going to set up the lighting. So for this this image, what I want is I want it to look as though light is sort of streaming in from the window into the scene. Now currently, if we just added a sun lamp, it would look like this kitchen was out in the middle of a parking lot or something, or a tornado would rip the roof off. There'd be sun going everywhere because we don't. It's not closed off. We don't have any ceilings or anything like that. So I'm just going to quickly model just a surrounding wall to go around the image. Just doing this very quickly. Like so. And I'm just going to give it the ceiling now. And to put in 2 windows, just going to do that and cut it again going vertically, and then selecting face select mode, remove those faces and just drag those out, just give it sort of a window ledge look there. Alright, so it's looking alright for now. Not sure why, but that's sort of bent around the wrong way a little bit. Anyway, and I might just move these in just to make the windows a little bit wider as well. I'm going to call this tutorial 2. Nope. You can see how many times I've tried doing this tutorial. Alright, there we go. Now for this window here, what I'd recommend you do is sort of model in some window sills, like a grid going across the window, and that'll just throw some nice shadow patterns across the interior of the kitchen. I won't show you how to do that just for the sake of speeding things along, but I'm sure you can figure out how to scale cubes and things like that. Fairly easy step. And you just want to make sure that the room is completely closed off. You don't have any light sort of seeping in from the floor or anything like that, and otherwise that'll just throw off the lighting for the whole scene. So what we need to do to enable sky and sun lighting, click Cam Environment, and then in this environment setting, just select Sun Sky. Okay, now you can see there it says create a Blender sun lamp. What it's doing is it's basically it's using sky, so it's going to give like a blue tinge for the environment surrounding it, and it's going to use the Blender sun lamp as a direction for which to throw the sun. So we need to add a Blender sun lamp, and as you can see, it's automatically detected it in that little script there. And I'm just going to rotate it sort of about there, and that would just as I said, just determine where the light is going to be thrown across the scene. So that's pretty good there, like that. Alright, so it's pretty good. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to just show the other way of lighting things, and that is using basically meshes to light things. I'm going to add some downlights just underneath this stove here. So what you need to do is add a circle, or any mesh light. Any mesh will do, but for this case I'm going to use a circle. Now what this will do is it will throw light from this mesh object here, and that's basically the only other way to add light to a scene. You can add the Blender sun lamp, but for any other lighting source you need to use mesh lighting. So I'm going to give this a material. I'm going to call it light. Now the direction in which it throws the light determines on which way the normals are pointed. So you can find that out just by going into the editing panel, clicking draw normals, and whichever way those little blue lines are, that's the direction that the normals are pointing. So currently that's pointing down, so that's in the right direction. So now I'm just going to scale this down just so it's the right size of those downlighting there. And I'm going to put this in the appropriate position about there. And I'm just going to duplicate that as well, and just position one on the other side. Okay, now for the material to set up the lighting, what you need to do is where it is light, and then select the material type for it. You need to set it to light. Okay, pretty straightforward. Now this temperature here, that defines what the physical object is in the real world. I think it's about, 6,000 is like studio lighting, and the further you go down it's supposed to be more realistic. I don't know the exact temperature of these halogen bulbs, whatever they are. I think there's a guide out there which I saw, which you can look at. Well, for the sake of it, I'm just going to give it sort of a slightly orangey color there, like that. Now you don't actually set the power for it. It's something that took me a while to work out. The power, that doesn't really change much. It determines on the rest of the lights in the scene and how much brighter it needs to be. Now these mesh lights here are quite small, so it's going to be overpowered by how bright the sun is. So you need to increase the gain amount. That's the main one you need to be increasing. And I'm just going to set this to let's say 10. Alright, so now we've basically essentially got 3 sources of lighting. We've got this sun lamp here. We've also got the sky lighting there, sky component, and we've also got the stove lighting here. Now, as I said at the beginning in the opening presentation, you can change the lighting once it's finished rendering, or whilst it is still rendering. Now you can do that by splitting things up into different light groups, okay? So that's what you've got, these features here: light group, default, things like that. So by default, every light is set to default as the light group. So if you just type in a different name, so if I type in sky and sun, it automatically splits it up into a different light group for you. You don't need to add light groups or anything like that. It'll automatically do that for you. So then I'm just going to call this group here for the downlight. I'm just going to call this downlight. And that will allow us to adjust the color of each of those settings later once it's finished rendering if we want to. So it's pretty much, it's ready to go at this stage. However, I must note that these objects here on the table, the chopping board, the bread knife, the bread, that is something that is probably, it's too in-depth for this tutorial to show you how to, texture bread and things like that. That's sort of, it's like tutorial material on its own, really. So, I mean, you can see how long this tutorial has gone already. It's dragging on a bit. So, unfortunately, I won't have time to show you how to model that. How to texture and do that. So I'm just going to remove it. But if you want to have a look at the finished.blend, you can have a pull apart and see how that works. But anyway, so that's the base scene is now set up. What I'm going to do is hit render. And you'll see, if you just watch up here, you'll notice a little progress bar as it exports everything, exporting geometry. You'll see it loads up. Takes a little while to export all the geometry. And then there you go. Then Lux Render pops into view and starts rendering. So I'm going to let this render for 10 minutes just to give it time to sort of work its thing out. And then I'm going to show you just a little bit about how to adjust settings once it's finished rendering. Alright, so I've let this go long enough now. As you can see down here, it gives you the time it's been running. It's gone for just over 15 minutes now. So I'm going to go up here and hit pause. That's where you can pause the rendering process. Now what I'll show you is basically some of the settings and things you can change once you're in the render program itself. So from just using Lux Render now, there's a number of things. Tone mapping, that's one that is I definitely recommend you change. By default, it's set as re-in hard, non-linear. I recommend you switch to the linear format. And it'll go automatically blown out white. But what this gives you is different camera controls that you should be that you can use. So this is accurate to real cameras in real life. So it is it's a lot better than using a non-linear method. So that's why I'm switching to that now. And this, if you just sort of go through this, there's different sort of rules out there. If you want to have a look at different camera settings on the internet for outdoors, indoors, things like that. But you can sort of experiment and get realistic looking camera results. A lot more realistic than what you would in Blender trying to fake it, because this is real to a real camera in real life. The other thing that you can do is apply lens effects. Now this is something that I used for my final image I used Vignette. You can turn on that. I wouldn't turn it on that much though. The other big one that I used is Bloom. I think a lot of people in Facebook, they said they liked the hazy sunlight effect I gave it. There wasn't, I didn't actually use any volumetrics for mine. The hazy sunlight look actually came from the Bloom. So if we, let's see what radius that's at, maybe something like here. If we just click compute layer, what this will do is it'll apply, it takes a little while to process, I think, the Bloom effects for the light areas in the scene. And that is what gave the scene that sort of hazy sunlight look. So let's just wait for that to finish now. Okay, so there you go. You got that sort of nice hazy bloom effect. There's probably a little bit too much, but I won't adjust it again. That's all right. And you can also apply glare. That's the same thing, where it just gives you that sort of that starry glow effect coming from windows and things and shiny objects like that. That's a really cool effect you can apply as well. But now what I want to show you about primarily is the light groups effects. So that is basically where you can change the lighting now that it's finished rendering. So you can see here that we split everything up into different light groups: downlight, sunlight, skylight. Now watch, if I turn down gain, let's turn down the sun. Okay, let's just turn this down. And you could see that it's now turning it down in real time. You're now decreasing that sunlight effect. And you can really now see the bloom coming through. But yeah, and you can increase it and things like that. And you can also change the temperature of the lights. You can make it really, really red or really, really blue. You could do a number of different things here. And yeah, it all happens in real time. If you're wondering how the process works, it works by basically it renders three images, one for each light group. So the more light groups you have, the more images it renders. I think that's how it works. And basically, by changing this gain value, it's applying different opacities for that render. So that's basically how it works. It's just basically changing as like a layer on top of each other. Sort of how the opacity works, but it's really, really clever, and it's really, really cool. If you've never used it before and you see that, it's like, wow, that's pretty cool. So the other one I'm going to change is the downlighting here. You can see up in the corner there, over here, you've got the downlighting. We're going to make that a little bit brighter. You know, you can make it blow out the entire scene like that, or you can just sort of decrease it down a little bit. So you can even change like whole color schemes. So if I turn off the sun and I decrease the sky to something like that, and I might just turn off this horrible bloom effect. You can see it doesn't look right. If the sun's not there, the bloom just looks horrible. Let's just delete that. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so now it sort of looks like you've changed the whole scene from being sunlight to being looking like it's at nighttime, and you've just got those sort of downlights happening, which is kind of cool. And let's just decrease, that's the sky, let's decrease this lamp, and you can increase it as well. And you can also change that temperature there of it as well, sort of a bit lighter like that. But you can see you can do a whole different range of things in LuxRender to get different results. It's really very cool. One thing to note though with these light groups, before you go nuts and just start changing and switching up everything, you should note that things do look better the way they are rendered, in that it's more accurate the way that it's rendered. When you shouldn't be changing light groups every time you hit render, because the scene is calculated according to how bright the lamps are, the colors of the lamps, things like that. So if you go changing things too much, it does lose accuracy. So you just need to be mindful of that. But there you go. So that pretty much concludes this tutorial. It's been a bit of a long one, this one. My apologies if it's dragged on a little bit too long. There was a lot to cover. But yeah, hopefully it all makes sense to you now, external rendering and things like that. I do recommend you do a lot of experimenting before you approach a complex scene like this one. So I mean, I think I spent about probably just a whole day just experimenting with just a blank room, and just throwing in different objects and different materials, just to sort of get a feel for the program, how lighting works and things like that. And then from there you can jump into more complex scenes like this one. But there you go. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, got something from it. I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback on it. So if you can leave a comment, that'd be much appreciated. That's all from me. Thanks very much for watching.